Years ago, I had a conversation with a pastor, and he started talking about culture war stuff and all these threats to the church. And one of the threats that he referenced that we needed to fight was DEI. He went on for a little bit about how dangerous DEI was, how unfair it was. And then I asked him, okay, define DEI. Explain really why you think specifically it's a problem and where you believe it's inconsistent or incompatible with Christian conviction. And he couldn't. He couldn't explain, he couldn't define DEI. I want to explain briefly why DEI is not something to fear, why some DEI is in fact something that Christians should embrace. At its core, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a framework to promote fair treatment of all people, to seek to bring about the full participation of all people in community, especially historically marginalized people, people who have often been underrepresented in society, in social groupings, in organizations, communities, due to aspects of their identity, their ability, or otherwise their background. Okay, there are all sorts of things that you can question and so on, but what is wrong with the basic concept of DEI? Let me talk a little bit about one aspect of DEI, equity. Here I'm going to use a very familiar illustration for anybody who's taken any time with DEI literature. So we begin with what is called reality. Think about the metaphor or the illustration of a baseball game. Everybody's watching the baseball game, but or trying to, but not everybody has the same view. See, some people come to life with no apple boxes at all. In fact, they are begin life in a hole. Talk about various disadvantages by which people can begin life and through which they live their life. Some people, they maybe start with one apple box. Other people have many apple boxes. That's reality. We begin, some people begin life in poverty, other people begin life as multimillionaires or in a family of multimillionaires. That's the reality. And the question is, how can you make that to increase equality? So what you might do is say, okay, how are there ways that we can get it so that everybody gets an apple box? That's more equal. And now everybody has a better shot at having access to the baseball game of life. But of course, you can still see, as noble as equality is, that there are inadequacies with equality because some people still have disadvantages, so that the same amount given to them doesn't enable or equip them in the same way it does to another individual. That's where you get to the E of DEI, equity. Equity seeks to go bring about policies of redistribution, actions of redistribution, of reallotments, of reorganization that can allow for a distribution of resources that can more suitably address all of these issues. So you can have equity. And in equity, now maybe one person gets two apple boxes and one person gives up their apple box because they don't need it, and everybody can see the game. Now, I know, I can imagine, I can anticipate what critics will say is, "What are you talking about government taxes, blah, blah, blah. Why are you stealing from me?" Look, here's the basic idea. This is the basic idea. You can debate policies all day long, but the basic philosophy behind DEI and the core idea of equity in particular is to ensure that everybody has access to the baseball game. That's the end goal. That's the telos. That's the purpose. That's the direction. Can you at least agree that this is something that is not to be feared? Certainly not to be something that's viewed as fundamentally incompatible with Christian conviction, but rather is a living out of Christian conviction to seek equity. And just like any Christian can wrestle with how do you redistribute resources in a community to make it more equitable for everybody, to allow the full inclusion and welcoming of everybody, you can debate the policies. Or can you at least agree on the end goal? And that somebody who is opposed in principle to equity and thinks equity, or more generally, also diversity and inclusion, are somehow inimical, inconsistent with Christian conviction, are just fundamentally in error about this. Now, I'm going to conclude with a quick illustration from a heavy metal concert. Back in October of 2022, I saw Australian heavy metal hard rock band named Airborne. I saw them in concert in Edmonton at a venue called Midway, which is kind of like a very large hub area. So it's pretty can be pretty cramped in there with 300 people or whatever packed in. Airborne is known for being like a very hard driving hard rock band. And you know what's really tough when you're in a crowded pub space in a hard rock band? You know what's very tough is when you have a person who is disabled in a wheelchair. How do they find, first of all, does that concert space welcome, in terms of the diversity, people who are in wheelchairs? Because you typically think of a hard rock concert, people, you know, bumping around to one another. There's a mosh pit down below. It's not a very welcoming space. So you don't have the diversity often represented of a person in a wheelchair. It's not a very inclusive space. And then in terms of equity, they're not going to have a very good line of sight, obviously, because they're sitting and everybody else is standing. They're not going to see the equivalent of the baseball game of life, the concert going on around them. This concert was different, however. You wouldn't think of Airborne, a hard rock band, as being DEI. But here's the thing, here's the key. DEI is just about being kind. It's just about being welcoming. It's just about being hospitable to people. So, near the beginning of the concert, I was standing there on the side, and there was a space that had been reserved for a young man in a wheelchair right up at the front on the side so that he could have a clear line of sight, because then below that was the pit where, the mosh pit area. So he was just above that. I was standing behind him so he could have a clear line of sight. And that space had been kept for him. Just a simple sign of equity, of allowing him, by the reservation equivalent to giving him two apple boxes, allowing him to see the stage. But then the real cool moment came about halfway through the concert. Joel O'Keefe, the lead singer and one of the guitarists, he comes out, moves into the crowd, comes right up to this young man, and as you can see here, uh, plays for the young man, actually gets down on his knees and plays a section of the song for this young man in a wheelchair. Hey, I don't know if hard rock is your thing or not. I don't know if Airborne is your thing or not. Might not be your kind of show. Not really my point. My point is that Joel O'Keefe took extra steps to make this young man in a wheelchair at a hard rock show in a bar feel welcome. That's all DEI is. That's all it is. In its core philosophy, is taking the steps to go out into the audience and to play for a person, kneel down, play them a section of the song so they only have their own mini concert and they feel included. They feel welcomed. And the community of hard rock concert goers becomes more diverse and it becomes enriched as we all express hospitality to one another, to welcome people from different backgrounds, to be able to enjoy the same concert. Why would any Christian, now, you still may think rock music is of the devil, but you certainly shouldn't think DEI is of the devil, because for my view, this is kingdom work.